sermon time in the middle of Torah. It always throws me a little bit. So I'm going to start by saying something that is probably a shock to absolutely no one. Nostalgia is big business. People like the feeling of having a warm memory from the past, oftentimes in a past when things felt safe and stable. And people are willing to spend money to have said nostalgic feelings. According to the Harvard Business Review, they're also even likely to feel like they need less money when they are feeling nostalgic, and therefore more likely to continue spending money on nostalgia. Found that kind of amusing, because this summer there were two different movies that came out that both attempted to capitalize on millennial nostalgia specifically, one with significantly greater success than the other. Ninja Turtles, which had made as of September 17th, when I looked it up, about 114 million in the box office, and absolutely pales in comparison to the one that came out 1 week earlier, the Barbie movie, which at that point had made 1.4 billion. And like many people this summer, I bought my first ticket to a movie in the theaters since the COVID pandemic began. I donned the only shirt that has pink on it. It wasn't even a pink shirt that I owned, and went to the theater. And there I was treated to moments of childhood memories as dolls that I had owned as a kid flashed to life across the screen in front of me. I had actually expected to simply be treated to a joyful few hours of pink nostalgia, to a time when I had played with those dolls as a kid. I had expected to feel like I had in middle school and high school when I went to see Legally Blonde and Mean Girls, respectively. But what I actually saw was not only the candy nostalgia of getting to pretend that I was 8 years old again. What I saw was also a deep story about life, loss, growth. I saw a story about striving to be more than we currently are, and yet being true to who we have already been. I saw a story of confronting uncertainty and fear and what it means to be a human being. I saw the story of the Yamim Noraim, of the high holidays. Yep, this year, Barbie is coming to Yom Kippur. I have actually known this since late July. I will attempt to keep the majority of my descriptions of the movie to things that are fairly clear from the trailers, and my spoilers to a minimum, because I do think, even if you think you are not someone for whom the Barbie movie is an interesting movie, you might actually enjoy it. Because this was a comedy that teaches some of the deep truths about being human, and that nostalgia and memory are incredible tools for growth, even when they sometimes hurt. So the movie opens when Barbie wakes up in her bright pink dream house, a smile already on her face. I have never woken up with a smile, but she sits up in her pink bed wearing pink pajamas and waves to her neighbor, because there are no walls on Barbie dream houses, and calls out, "Hi, Barbie." Her neighbor, in an entirely different doll in her own pink bed with pink pajamas, waves back, "Hi, Barbie." Her morning routine goes perfectly. She hops into her pink sports car to spend her day in a pink dress on a pink beach, and with many more "Hi, Barbies." Many more "Hi, Barbie" exchanges along the way, even to the Barbie who is piloting an airplane. "Hi, Barbie." She is about to have her best day ever, just like yesterday and just like tomorrow. Until cracks start to appear in her world. The next morning, her hair is a little messy. The plastic toy toast is somehow burnt. The non-existent water in her shower runs ice cold. To the absolute horror of the other Barbies, her heels hit the floor. The tiniest patch of cellulite appears on her upper thigh. And mid-evening dance party, she says, "Do you guys ever think about dying?" And the music scratches. Barbie Land is perfect. It should not have realities like cellulite and death. The other Barbies send her off to see Weird Barbie, which is what happens when a Barbie is played with too hard, who lives outside of town in a wacky, colorful house and has an unusual haircut and drawings around her eye. Weird Barbie presents Barbie with a choice. It's very confusing. Everyone in the movie is Barbie. Weird Barbie presents main Barbie, stereotypical Barbie, with a choice represented by two shoes. The first, a shiny pink high heel, offers her the option to avoid and ignore the issues, pretending that everything is perfect and that nothing is wrong. The other, a Birkenstock, demands that she venture into the real world to find the human who is playing with her and is apparently living a real and messy and emotionally fraught human life. Barbie tries to choose the heel. We might laugh, but how many of us would do the same if we were given the option? How many of us do as we go about our daily lives, ignoring the problems of the world, even the problems in our own small lives? How many of us try to pretend that there is no such thing as burnt toast or cold showers or loss? But Weird Barbie doesn't let her. The high holy days, especially this moment in them, these days of taking stock of our lives, praying for forgiveness so that we can do better, imagining how to do better. The high holy days also don't let us. We have to choose the Birkenstock, even if we can't actually wear said leather sandal on Yom Kippur. From here, Barbie begins a journey into the real world and discovers that the real world is not quite like Barbie Land. On her journey, whose details I won't spoil further here, she learns what it is to cry, to love, and to stand up for herself, and to see others cry. She meets her human counterpart, and they learn from one another about the real world, about hope, about inspiration, about what it means to be human. For Barbie, it's overwhelming. It is, quite frankly, a loss of innocence. And I don't mean innocence as in childish, I mean innocence as in the feeling that the world is always stable, and as stable as it was when we were children, if we were blessed to have caring and loving and stable homes. It's about the loss of the illusion that the world is safe and predictable, that it doesn't change, that we don't change, that every day can be the best day ever, just like yesterday and just like tomorrow. At some point, Barbie seems to find it really difficult to cope with how messy and complicated the real world is. She misses her previous plastic life. She's frustrated that the simpler times she remembers are no longer a reality and frankly can't be now that she knows about the real world. In a moment of frustration, she says to her human counterpart, Gloria, "I never wanted anything to change." "Honey, that's life," responds Gloria. "It's all change." But that's terrifying. That didn't just sum up the high holidays. Yes, this is the time of year in which we take a look at our lives and we examine what has changed and what hasn't and what needs to. We remember what used to be better and what has become better. We remember what we have done right and what we've done wrong. Often our confessionals feel like sometimes we keep meaning to change them and yet we're still confessing to the same things. Can't quite seem to figure out how to change that one thing yet. Other times there are changes that we know are so big and so permanently life-altering that we'll never be the same the next time we come to that confession. Some of the life-altering changes that occur bring us untold joy. Perhaps you accomplish something you've been working toward for a long time. Perhaps you welcomed a new little person to your family. Perhaps you've landed the dream you've always wanted, the dream job you've always wanted. I was last year, but still. But sometimes the changes we experience are rife with pain and grief and anger. That's terrifying. Those are the terrifying ones, and the ones that make the idea of repentance also difficult. Those are the ones that make us wish that nothing ever changed, that we could have the pink heel, that we would never have to think about dying or who has died. In Barbie Land, there are characters who've left, and no one seems to notice. They've just sort of disappeared to Weird Barbie's house. Yet on Yom Kippur, the very day of atonement and return, we put on white, the color of burial in our tradition. We abstain from food and water. We take the tiniest taste of our own death, and then in a moment, we'll recite Yizkor prayers, remembering the loved ones we knew before their deaths came into our lives. This is how we do tshuva? Repentance, return? How can we possibly return to the people to who we were when the people we relied upon to do it are no longer here? How can I return to who I was when my loved ones could guide me if they're no longer here to do it? Through memory, Yizkor. By remembering and letting the people we have loved and lost in the last year, for some in the last few days, and in years past, be present in our minds. By giving ourselves the permission to remember who they were and to remember who we were when they were with us. By giving ourselves the moments to imagine that they are still next to us, the shower still warm, and the toast still golden brown. Throughout the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, Moses gives the people the gift of his memory. And he calls for them to remember what mattered most to him. Moses left us an ethical will. In chapter 8, verse 2, he says, V'zacharta et kol haderech asher holicha Adonai Elohecha ze 40 shana b'midbar. Remember the long way that Adonai, your God, has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years. Remember the long ways, zacharta et haderech, or really remember the path, remember the journey, remember the trip. Chizkuni, or Rabbi Hezekiah ben Manoach, who composed his commentary on the Torah in the mid-13th century in France, says that Moses here is calling on us, calling on the people to remember the entire journey, every step throughout the joys and the trials of the wilderness, which is actually really hard to do, isn't it? So often when we think about a memory, we get flashes, we get a mental photograph, maybe a short video clip, but we rarely get the whole film, as it were, the whole journey, unless we make an effort. And when we do, it doesn't actually come through as visuals. It doesn't come through as images and sounds. Reality in those moments, it comes through in emotion. It comes through in the feelings that well up as we remember the flashes of someone we loved and how they made us feel. It comes through in tears, and it comes through in laughter. When we remember the things that they said to us, the things they taught to us, the joys we experienced together, and the difficult times we experienced together. It comes through as anything but shiny pink plastic. It comes through as deeply human, deeply connected to the realities of love and loss, life and death. It comes through in living. It comes through in being human. It isn't something we have to ask for or want. It's something we just discover. Mentioned at the beginning of the sermon that nostalgia is big business. It got me thinking about the difference between nostalgia and Yizkor. Nostalgia is indeed a type of memory. What I think is truly remarkable about memory is how we use it and what we do with it. On the one hand, nostalgia is a positive and can be an escape. It can be a few minutes or a few hours in which we pretend that things are as they used to be. Do you know that there's actually a psychological study that found that no matter how old a person is, most of us think that the world was a better place until right before we were born, which is a lot of different years in this room, and that it started really going downhill when we were children. So nostalgia is pretending that we're kids again. And it doesn't matter if you were born in the 1930s, 1960s, 80s, or 2000s, or even more recently. Things were great until right about when you were born. And then they got worse. So sometimes nostalgia is getting back a little bit of time to live in the past, to live in the childhood that felt better than the adulthood you're living. It's a dopamine hit, or remembering your favorite doll. But I think Yom Kippur is asking us to use memory and even nostalgia differently. Today, in this moment of memory, we're not placing ourselves in the past to sit there. We are asked to use memories of a better time to inspire us to build to an even better future. We're asked to remember our mistakes, to confront them, and then ask forgiveness for them so that we can move past them and instead focus on the joys of our memories. Part of why I think that Barbie was so much more successful than Ninja Turtle is that it didn't invite me to just pretend that I was 8 years old again. It used nostalgia to get me through the door. And then it challenged me to remember the whole journey of the life that I have lived since I was 8. It asked me to remember who the 8-year-old I was would have wanted me to be now. And then challenged me to figure out how to become that woman. Even with the life I have lived and the cracks that have occurred in my world, the times I've had to eat burnt toast. That is how memory serves tshuva. Who did you wish to be? What can you do in the year ahead to become that person now? When Moses asks us to remember the journey, it wasn't so that we would stay in the wilderness. It was so that we could move forward from it. Nostalgia on its own takes us back to a time before that loss of innocence, before an earth-shattering or life-altering event, the event that changed us from who we were to who we are. And it's so tempting to stay there. For Barbie, it all changes when she confronts the uncertainty of the real world and a sudden awareness of mortality. In truth, for so many of us, it's that sudden awareness of mortality that changes everything. When someone who had been foundational to who we are, who we were, is no longer present. Perhaps it was a grandparent, a parent, a teacher, a friend, a sibling, child. We face those losses fresh throughout our lives, and acutely on days as today when we reflect upon our own lives and remember those who helped shape our lives. It is okay to sometimes wish that things were just still the way that they were. But we grow when we instead remember the journey and embrace who we've managed to become. I want to conclude with a different story of growing when life turns out to be not what we'd expected. Parents who were in the children's service got a taste of this. The Dubner Maggid used to tell a story of a king who possessed a large, beautiful, flawless diamond. At the end of each day, the king would unwind from his strenuous day of governing by gazing at this diamond and marveling that in a messy and difficult world, there was one thing that he could look at that was perfect and whole. But one day, his hand slipped as he picked up his diamond, and it fell to a cold, hard stone floor. With trepidation, he bent down to retrieve it, and his face fell. There, across his precious gemstone, was a crack running from top to bottom. The king began to weep, for he worried that now perfection was gone from the world. He called upon every jeweler in his realm, hopeful that someone would repair his treasure, and yet none could. They worried that if they tried to buff out the crack, it would change the shape. If they tried to fill it in, it would still be visible. If they tried others, it would lose the integrity of the stone. And so they each told the king that once cracked, a diamond can never be quite what it used to be. So he sent messages beyond his immediate kingdom, hoping to find someone who could help him. promised a great reward for anyone who could. And one day, a wise woman came to the king and asked if she could look at the diamond. The king, despairing as to whether he would ever see it fixed, gave it to her. She looked at it and then said to the king, "If you let me take it, I will bring it back to you, and it will be more perfect than before." Several days later, when the day that this wise jeweler was to return arrived, the king could hardly contain his excitement. When she was arriving at the palace gate, he rushed to open the door himself rather than wait for a servant, threw the doors open, ready to take the little box from her hand. His hand shook as he held the little box and flipped open its lid. And the king's face turned red with fury as he saw that the crack was still there. "You promised you would fix it. You told me that it would be more perfect than it was before," he shouted to her. "Turn it over," she said gently. "Look at the top." When he did, the king saw that there was now a rose carved into the top with leaves, and the crack was indeed the stem to that piece of art, a vital piece of the puzzle and a source of new growth. "You were right," he said to the wise woman. "It is indeed more perfect than it was before." As we approach the conclusion of the season of Teshuvah, it is tempting to think that the only way to repent is to actually return, to go back in time to the moments when our lives were pink plastic high heels and our hearts perfect smooth diamonds. But I think we're actually supposed to turn forward with the help of Birkenstocks, burnt toast, and cracked diamonds. We're supposed to hold on to the journeys that gave us the carvings that we now carry in our hearts. Indeed, our own hearts are like that king's diamond. They may start out unblemished and flawless, joyful in a perfect, safe, unchanging world. And then we lived. We've experienced hardship and we've experienced loss. We've lost the people who were so foundational to our lives that we're not sure how we're continuing without them. But when we remember the journey of being human, knowing that the world is imperfect, but we can live it anew anyway, we remember every step of the journey we've taken and the people who helped us in those steps, the people who helped us become who we are. And the project of Yom Kippur and memory becomes making art of those cracks. Our hearts, scarred, become more perfect than they were before. May the memories of those we remember in our Yizkor service today bring us comfort. May we gaze upon the cracks that their losses have left on our hearts and remember the journeys that we had with them and the journeys we've been forced to take without them. May we carve flowers onto those cracks with the lessons that they taught us. May we remember that we can be more whole than we were before because we knew them and because we continue to carry them.